Okay. Got it. The first thing I want to tell all of you is, yes, we are going to completely finish Judges today. And double checking, everybody has their Samuel's packet, right? There's nobody that doesn't have it as far as we know. Perfect. You're going to need that next week, because what I'm going to do is segue into the Samuels next week. We're going to go through the packet because there's a lot of good information in there. And then the following week, Barbara will start, and she's going to do the first 3 chapters of Samuel, of 1 Samuel. And I want to advise, I guess, all of you, if you have to miss the lessons that Barbara will be doing, make sure you listen to the recording, because with her Catholic background, she's going to be comparing part of her lessons are Hannah's song and Mary's song. And that's all I'm going to say. That's a teaser or an advertisement, but it's really going to be a magnificent introduction, I'm sure, knowing Barbara and how great her lessons are. So if you miss it, do watch the recordings. Okay.
I'll get that the second week.
Okay. Well,
from the beginning.
Right.
You need
She'll start,
get acquainted with Hannah.
Yeah, to get acquainted with Hannah. And by the way, remember that name Hannah. I'm going to use it next week. But anyway, as I mentioned earlier, for those of you that weren't on, I do the Moravian Church daily texts. And lately they've really been fitting into what we're studying at Judges. And I'm going to read a couple of them. This is from the April 25th, Tuesday, April 25th text that they sent, but I think it fits very well. The first passage is from Psalm 112, verse 4, and it reads, "Light shines in the darkness for the upright. He is gracious, compassionate, and righteous." And we all know many of the judges did not follow that. The second reading is from the 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. "This slight momentary affliction is preparing for us for an eternal rate of glory beyond all measure, because we look not at what can be seen, but what cannot be seen." Okay, and Laura has volunteered to do the opening prayer. Laura?
Good morning, my dear sisters in Christ. The prayer is very brief, but it's taken from Ephesians 3:16 and 17. "I pray that out of God's glorious riches, He may strengthen you with power through His Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and how long and how high and how deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Amen."
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That was
Very nice. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you.
I love that phrase that says about
And this
all the
morning-
love that surpasses knowledge. I mean, that's a beautiful line.
Mhm. And I sometimes think our problem is we try to understand everything. And you've heard both Barbara and me say this, we're doing it with our finite minds. God's mind is infinite. And we are also looking at everything in human timelines. And God's timeline is eternal or everlasting. And when we do that, we when we think with our finite minds into a time period, we are putting God in a box. And he doesn't work that way. Which is why my list, and I'm sure many of your lists, are all getting longer and longer and longer for what we're going to ask him when we finally get there. Anyway, if you pull your sheet, it's page 15, the outcome of Jacob's predictions. The outcome of Jacob's predictions. And you've all heard me say this many times, that the Bible always explains the Bible. And it also predicts. And it tells us things that we need to do more than once. It tells us over and over and over. And as I've said before, I also picture God up there saying what I said to many times to my kids: how many times do I have to tell you? Okay. And obviously it wasn't enough times for the Israelites when they moved into their promised kingdom during the time of Judges. The outcome of Jacob's predictions, and I think you have them there in front of you, hopefully. We're not going to go through all of them. We're going to look at the prediction that, and it's our word, not the Bible's word, of what Jacob said to his sons at the end of his life. Okay. And if we see if they came to fruition, not only in Judges, but they'll happen later on. Now, during Jacob's time, they're in Egypt, and the Jews were in Egypt from 1875 to 1445 BC. Okay. Jacob's death was in the 1900s BC. Jacob's death was in the 1900s BC. Okay. Keeping those two things in mind, let's look at our sheet. Let's go down. Reuben and Simeon are not mentioned in Judges per se, their actions. So we're going to look at the tribe of Levi, and I'm going to be you might want to go to Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49, that's where we're going to be the majority of time. Okay, and the chart gives us the two verses that pertain to Levi, and they are actually 3, 5 through 7. I'm going to be reading from the King James Bible today because, and it's a Bible by the esteemed King James scholar, Charles, and I never know how to pronounce his last name, Ryrie, Ryrie. And he was considered the best King James scholar as far as interpreting. He was a minister. He's deceased. Those of you way back when we went to the Bible Museum, the first time, there was a center aisle or hallway down that Bible Museum, and it was all Charles Ryrie's books and his writings. And they were at the museum for quite a while, and he was just considered one of the best. So that's why I'm using this Bible today. Okay, Levi at verses 49, verses 5 through 7. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. This was to a reference to something they had done in their younger days. And it goes on, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Okay. And in the outcome, it tells about Levi joining Simeon in the attack on Shechem. You can go back and read it. And his descendants were given no land of their own in Canaan, although they were allowed to live in designated Levitical cities. Okay, so what Jacob is saying here, because of what you did, you're not going to get any land. Now, we read it and we find it in Leviticus and Numbers that, and we know that the Levites were named the priests and were to take care of God's word and the tabernacle. And they were, of course, to do all of the work involved therein. And notice I'm talking about the Levites, not just Aaron's line. Okay? That pretty much happened. The Levites did not get any land. They didn't get any land. And of course, they became the priests. Now, some Levites that we know about are, of course, Aaron, who was the first high priest, Moses, his brother. You'll find when we get into the Samuels that Eli, the next judge we're going to be reading about, is a Levite. Ezra, and he's one of those that came back afterwards. Yes, the book of Ezra is in the Bible. And John the Baptist. John the Baptist, the man who did what for Jesus?
Baptized.
Baptized him, was a Levite. Okay. Comments? Let's look at the next one then, Judah. And he's talked about, the tribe of Judah is talked about in, again, Genesis 49, verses 8 through 12. And if somebody would read those words, those 4 verses, please. Who's got them there?
Oh, yeah.
Vivian, go ahead.
8 through 12.
8 through
Okay.
12.
Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, as in an old lion, who shall rouse him up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk.
Okay. Let's look at Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. I will go ahead and read it. And one of the elders said unto me, weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. what he's saying is that Judah is going to be the leader until Shiloh comes. And Shiloh is referring to who?
Jesus.
Jesus. Right? Now think back to what we read in the last chapters of Judges when everybody was going against the tribe of Benjamin. And they would go to God and ask God, should we do this? Anybody remember what God's answer was? He'd say, yes, but Judah is to go first. But Judah is to go first. And that's in the last chapters when they were going against the tribe of Judah. Or excuse me, the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. And so then let's go on to the tribe of Dan. And this is an interesting one. Let's read first what Jacob said about the tribe of Dan, verses 16 through 18. Verses 16 through 18. And if who's there? Laura, do you have them?
Yes,
Would you read it, please?
Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a serpent by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, O Lord.
Okay. That's a pretty harsh prediction, isn't it? And look how the tribe of Dan turned out. We know from our study of Judges all the trouble they caused in Judges. Remember, they were given the land in the south. They weren't happy with it. They didn't defend it. They didn't conquer and get all the land they were supposed to. And then they complained they weren't given enough. And then they traveled up north and completely destroyed peace-loving people who had nothing to do with the Israelites and whose land Dan had not been given, but the tribe of Dan completely destroyed them. And then the cities they built became centers of idolatry. Okay, and Jacob certainly predicted nothing good for the tribe of Dan. Let's remember also by looking at 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 28 and 29. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 28 and 29. Okay. Somebody have it?
I'll read it.
Okay.
1 Kings 12, 28, 29. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." One he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan.
Okay. This, and of course we took it out of context there, but a little background. This is after the north and the south. Israel has split. They're now in 2 parts. And Jeroboam is the king of the north. And he doesn't want people going back down to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. And so he builds from gold these 2 golden calves. Anybody remember that from Genesis? In a golden calf? Of course, history repeats itself. And anyway, one of the calves, the tribe of Dan put in their area. Look at Revelation 7, and you've all heard Marilyn and me talk about this. Revelation 7, verses 3 through 8. Revelation 7, verses 3 through 8.
Oh, yeah.
Who has it?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. Revelations 7, 3 through 8. Okay. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. From the tribe of Asher, 12,000. From the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. From the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. From the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. From the tribe of Levi, 12,000. From the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. From the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. From the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. And from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000.
Who's missing?
Dan.
And
Dan. And scholars believe that because of what Dan did in Judges and in the passage that we read in First Kings, where they had allowed the golden calf up there. And also remember that the tribe of Dan took a Levite and made him a priest and considered all of his descendants priests for their particular tribe. They were not descendants of Aaron, as God had directed. Anyway, scholars believe because of this action, Dan is excluded from the 144,000, or many scholars, I say, biblical scholars, that these actions were what caused them to be excluded. And if you remember back to what we read just a couple seconds ago about the tribe of Dan in 16 through 18 and how they were going to be a big problem and everything, Jacob predicted it clear back in the beginning. Okay. Now, and feel free if any of you have any comments to add or that you disagree with. Okay. Gad, Asher, and Naphtali are not really mentioned in Judges. So we're going to drop down to Joseph, who's next to the bottom. And he's talked about in chapter 49. We're back in 49, going 22 through 26. 49, 20 through 26. Okay, Vivian, do you have that?
Yes, I do.
Would you read them, please?
Sure. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. But his bough abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Even by the God of thy father who shall help thee, and by the Almighty who shall bless thee, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's go back to chapter 48 of Genesis. Here in this prediction, they talk about Joseph and Jacob in his prediction in chapter 49 did not split up. But remember, Joseph himself did not inherit something because God took Jacob took Joseph's two sons who remembers?
Ephraim and
That's
Manasseh.
an Ephraim.
Manasseh and Ephraim. And he split the blessing between those two sons instead of giving it to Joseph personally. Let's look at Genesis chapter 48, 17 through 20. Genesis 48, 17 through 20. And this is where Jacob knows he's dying, just a little prefix. And he's called Joseph and his sons to come see him. Okay. And then starting with verse 17, who has it? Go ahead, Kim.
And when Joseph saw that his father had laid down his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. How far did you want me to go?
Through 20.
And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put my right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become the people, and he shall also be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh.
Okay. Now, we read quite a bit about Ephraim through the various chapters of Judges. A lot of people came and went through Ephraim. Remember, Manasseh was one of the tribes, well, the only one that was half and half, but half their people stayed west of Jordan and half the people went east of Jordan when they entered into the promised land. Ephraim became one of the largest tribes in the number of people. They were also given a very large area of ground, a large territory when they settled in. Now, two things. Number one, Deborah, the judge Deborah, was from the tribe of Ephraim. Okay. Two of the judges, Gideon and Jephthah, were from the tribe of Manasseh.
Who was the second one?
Jephthah,
Thank you.
Jephthah, one of the more minor judges.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put a break in here because I just realized from my notes, going back to the tribe of Dan, I don't think I told you this. Maybe I did and I've already forgotten. Isn't short-term memory the first to go? Anyway, Samson was a Danite. Samson was a Danite. Okay. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, and so we gave I gave you three people from Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob's blessing on Ephraim was really great. what we read in chapter 48. When the tribes split, when the nation split, and I'm not going to go into this in any depth because we'll get into it later, but there were only 4 kings: Saul, David, then there was, who was next? Do you remember? Solomon. And then Jeroboam, who was Solomon's son, became king. And this is when the nation split and Rehoboam became king of the northern kingdom. Okay, so there were only 4 kings. And Jeroboam was a king of the whole country for a very, very short time. Anyway, we all know from our previous studies that the nation split in 2. The northern kingdom composed of 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom composed of only 2 tribes. Okay? They became as known as the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Another name for them was Ephraim and Judah. So the northern kingdom also became known, all those 10 tribes, as the country of Ephraim after the split. That was another way to refer to it. Okay, and again, from what Jacob's blessing was, you see where he talked about they would become a great country. And they did become a larger portion of the country of Israel. Okay. Some other judges from, we'll say from Joseph, were Joshua and, of course, Samuel. And if you go to back to verse or chapter 48, and well, I'm not, I'll forget that. We're not going to do that because I'm running out of time. Okay. But go back and reread chapter 48, verses 10 through 15, because this is talking about the coming of Samuel. Okay. And in your outcome, it's telling you just what we said about, or what I said earlier about the northern kingdom that would one day rival Judah. Okay, let's get down to the tribe of Benjamin, the last one.
Marlene, question. You threw out the names Joshua and Samuel, but I don't know what you want to say about them.
Well, I was going to just, Joshua was the judge from the tribe of Joseph.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And Samuel is also mentioned under there.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, the tribe of Benjamin, and remember, that was the very smallest tribe of people number-wise. And they were just given a real small area south of Judah. But remember, we studied in Judges, and it tells you here in the outcome that they were known for their left-handed slingers. Okay. Now, I mentioned, and it tells you here in there, Saul. Now, Saul was not a prophet, and he was not in the time of Judges, but, well, he was, because he was during the time of Eli and Samuel. But King Saul, the first king of Israel, was a Benjamite. Okay. And let's look, and we know that because we look at 1 Samuel chapter 9, first chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. And that's all we're going to read because I don't know who's teaching chapter 9. I don't want to go into anything more they might say. But King Saul, first Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Kim Johnson, do you have that there? No, she doesn't. Okay. Donna, do you have it?
Tell me again, what was this?
First-
Which one?
First
Samuel.
Samuel chapter 9,
Yes, I've got it.
verses 1 and 2.
I've got it. There was a
Would you read-
Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of, Becharath, the son Aphiah of Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost, and Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go back and look for the donkeys."
Okay, thank you. So there it's telling us that Saul was a Benjamite. Okay. Now, Esther, Queen Esther was a Benjamite. And I don't know, I can't remember if we studied the book of Esther in our Bible study or not. Fascinating. Vivian?
Yeah. Remember, we took famous women. I took Esther.
Okay. Okay. So Esther and Saul of Tarsus was a Benjamite. Who was Saul of Tarsus?
Paul.
Paul. Very good. Remember, he was Saul when he was Jewish. When he became a Christian, he became Paul. And how do we know? Let's go to Romans 11. Romans 11. And Kim Bowers, I know you've been studying Romans, so I'm going to pick on you. Romans 11, chapter 1.
Yeah, let me get there.
You know, while she's looking, it strikes me that Benjamin was the smallest tribe, smallest territory, but man, they had a lot of famous people come out of there.
They had some great, and remember, not only were they the smallest tribe to start with, but what happened in the fighting?
They
All but
almost
six-
extincted.
All but 600 warriors were killed off, and they had to bring in women from other places, remember, from other
Yeah.
tribes,
Mhm.
through trickery. Okay, Kim, would you read? And by the way, in Romans, who wrote the book of Romans?
Paul.
Paul,
Oh,
Paul. Okay, and it was written around somewhere in the 50s, 50s AD. I'd have to look it up exactly. I'm sorry, I don't remember, but Paul wrote it. He was in Corinth at the time on his third missionary journey. And he had never been to Rome at the time he was writing the letter that we know as the book of Rome, or Romans, excuse me. Okay, and here's what he said in verse 11, chapter 1. Okay, Kim?
I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid. For I am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin.
Of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. Okay. Okay, that was a very fast review, but it goes to show you that Jacob clear back in the 1900s, 500 years before. While he didn't predict particular specific events, predicted how some of the 12 men that he was blessing and their descendants would act. And how many times have each of us looked at one or more of our children and said, I'm not sure she's going to do that well, or I'm not sure he's going to be, or he's going to be the greatest athlete on earth, you know. But Jacob's predictions were very accurate. And they called them blessings, of course. They didn't call them predictions in those at that time. Okay, any comments? And I do want to remind you that as Barbara said, the majority of, or at least the people that we looked at, came from the smallest tribe of people. And I don't know if I had us read chapter or verse 27 from the chapter 49, and I'll just read it. This was Jacob's prediction. Benjamin shall roam as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Very short, and it was predicted that Benjamin would be like a ravenous wolf, and he would be unsuccessful in war, which he was for a while, but also cruel. And then eventually would lose most of its people, but given a means or a way to survive as a tribe. Because remember, there were to always be, throughout eternity, the 12 tribes of Israel. Not a one of the tribes was to disappear. Okay. Now, those 12 tribes, in case any of you have picked up on what I said and what I didn't say, is remember what was promised to the Israelites was the land. The Israelites have not been promised the eternal life through Jesus as we know it. So does that mean in the second coming, when Jesus descends, and this will be when the Israelites finally receive or occupy or control, whatever word you want to use, the entire area of land that they were promised way back in chapter 12 of Genesis, that it would go from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean and down through the Nile. They may still exist on the land. Okay, am I making sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
Any comments? Vivian?
That was kind of the latitude, but what was the longitude? I mean, what was above them and below them that they were to possess?
Well, it went up, and how far was never specifically stated.
Okay.
But through, and I think back, oh gosh, I think I brought this out. I don't know what we were studying. Maybe Joshua. There is a record during the time of King Solomon, that he had to build a lot of forts because during the reign of Solomon, it was constant fighting. Okay. And he became, the greatest king on earth, but he had to supply all his forces. And so he built what we call forts or out areas where he would establish some soldiers there and literally build up, I guess, what you'd call a garrison or something.
Mhm.
And it is thought from records that they have found that at one time during the reign of Solomon, there was a garrison of Jewish soldiers based on the banks of the Euphrates. Okay. Now, does that mean, okay, they've conquered the whole land? No, because they were to be there as inhabitants living, not just sitting there and guarding. And, the area to give people safe passage. So the covenant that God made with Abraham is still in its existence. It was not conditional, and it is everlasting because there was no time given. So it is still in existence that the Jews will occupy all of that land. Okay. Any comments? Barbara?
Excuse me. I agree with you on what you just said about how far the promises went. But if you look at someone like Jeremiah and Isaiah, they predicted the Babylonian exile, the Assyrian, so that at that time the Israelites, I'm taking them as a whole, even though they were a divided nation. Okay, but the Israelite people, okay, were removed from that land. Okay,
Mhm.
but there was always a promise throughout that if they repented, okay, they would be restored. Okay, and in my feeling, it doesn't say this is me, all right, but my feeling is that, especially in Jeremiah, he's saying if you don't shape up, you're going to be shipped out. Okay, but all through history, there's been a remnant. Okay, there have been good Israelites, and they are the ones who seem to be carrying a torch, so to speak. Okay, so I feel, from what I read out of it, is we don't know when the end times are coming, okay? But I sincerely feel that the remnant, when they see Jesus come down for his 1,000-year reign, will convert and believe. Who wouldn't, that Jesus is the Messiah? And in that sense, they then become, truly, not just God's people, but the ones that are saved, along with the Gentiles have accepted Jesus as their Messiah. But I sincerely believe the day will come, from what I've read, that the remnant will accept Jesus as their Messiah. And we know today we have some quite a large amount of Jewish people who accept they're Jewish, but they accept Jesus as the Messiah. So hopefully at the end times, there'll be that earthly or heavenly union.
Right. And well said, Barbara. I'm looking for my timeline. The Jews have not, they're living in Israel now. But this is, and in fact, in your packets, and we'll cover this next week, the Jews, there's always been, well, since the time of Abraham, a small remnant. But as to land mass, they don't have a large amount today
No,
of
very little.
the land. That they had more land when they lived there during the time of Judges than they have now,
Mhm.
okay? And they've been kicked out of Israel time and time and time again. We know that the temple itself was destroyed in 70 AD. And then in 132 AD, they were kicked out of Israel. This is AD, after Jesus. They were kicked out of Israel and they were not allowed back into Israel. I'm talking about as a country for 500 years.
Yeah.
For 500 years. They returned in 638 AD. Okay, 638 AD. And then again, and this is during the time of the Crusades, what we call the Middle Ages. And from 1099 on, 1099 AD, the Jews in Jerusalem were annihilated. Okay. From 1300 to 1517, Egypt ruled over Israel. And then I'm going to jump, and then this is when many of them immigrated to Russia,
Mhm.
and they're all the pogroms, and that's POGROMS, and which it was just a matter of a way of annihilating the Jews. And then, and this was from 1517 to 1917. And then in April of 1879, the anti-Semitism movement in Germany began. Remember when World War II was, or think back from your history lessons. Barbara and I are laughing because we
We were
remember
there.
World War II. Anyway, I just brought home, I had my ration card. We found my old ration card from World War II. And I had it framed to give to one of my grandkids.
Oh, that's cool.
And
That's
yeah,
cool.
we had my dad's and my grandkids took it to school because during the years, most people have never seen a ration card. They've heard of them, but anyway, I'm digressing. There was no state of Israel during World War II. All those people that were taken to be annihilated were taken out of Germany and France and Poland and Italy. Okay, so, and if you look at, and it wasn't till after World War II in 47, 48, anyway, the United Nations decreed that there should be a land of Israel, but Jerusalem is an international city, half Palestinian and half Israelite. And it said until, Jerusalem becomes 100% Jewish, there won't be, Jesus isn't coming, that we'll see. I don't know. I haven't been given an exact time or date. But anyway, remember that the people have existed and are existing, even though the majority of the time they've been kicked out of the land.
Yeah.
They didn't have a land. Okay, and I didn't mean to get on that. How am I doing time-wise? I only have 5 minutes because I promised you we'd get done today. Turn to, or any comments? Any comments? Let's look at the sheet, Downward Path of Idolatry. Okay, this sheet I think is very, very interesting and thought-provoking. I don't know where I got it. I have so many pieces of paper, but It is comparing what was said in Judges to what Paul wrote in his letter to the Romans. All the verses from Romans are taken from chapter 1. Okay, and I told you earlier, he'd written this around 58, in fact, my notes say 58 AD. And I told you his third missionary journey. And this passage in Romans is from chapter 1, verse 18 to chapter 3, verse 20. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 to chapter 3, verse 20 is considered God's indictment of the world, showing why man needs the righteousness of God. And when you finish writing or are ready for me to go on, look up. Okay, I'll repeat that. It's verses 118 to 320, and it's God indictment of the world, showing why man needs the righteousness of God. Okay, and what they've done in this particular piece of paper is they've shown basically that hey, way back in Judges, the people weren't doing it. They were misbehaving. And as Paul is writing this in Romans, what? Well, from 400 AD, or from 1400, and this is 58, so we're looking at about 600 years that later that Paul is writing this. And Jesus has already been born. And what he's saying, hey, we're still doing all the things wrong, just like what they did in Judges. We aren't any better. Let's just look at the first one. I'm looking at Romans, and this is from chapter 1, verse 21. They've written it out for you here. Even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. And they compare that with Judges chapter 2 and what the Israelites were doing or not doing. So Paul in this thing to Romans, and I want to get in the last, so I'm not going to read it, but go through this. It's thought-provoking. We aren't any better than the Israelites were. Okay. The last sentence below the chart, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this. It says, if God called you to leave blank in order to follow him, would you? And fill in your own name. I don't mean your name personally, but someone. Think about it. Now,
It has to be a name.
Pardon me?
It has to be a name. I was going to write down everything.
That's a good word. That's a good word. But think about that. What would be your limits? Would you ever say, hey, God, that's enough. That's as far as I'm going to go. No more. Anyway, if you haven't chatted through the week, read this. I'd like to read you a poem in closing. I've had it for years. As you can see, the sheet is yellow. It wasn't when I first got it. But I keep it on my refrigerator, and it's just something I think that many of the people in Judges forgot. And I think sometimes we forget also. It's by, as I said, it's from the works of a poet called John Hall, Hall, and it's called At Day's End. Is anybody happier because you passed his way? Does anybody remember that you spoke to him today? The day is almost over and its toiling time is through. And is there anyone to utter now a kindly word to you? Can you now say tonight in parting with the day that's slipping fast, that you helped a single brother of the many that you passed? Is a single heart rejoicing over what you did or said? Does the man whose hopes were fading now with courage look ahead? Did you waste the day or lose it? Was it well or sorely spent? Did you leave a trail of kindness or a scar of discontent? As you close your eyes in slumber, do you think that God will say, you have earned one more tomorrow by the work you did today? Let's pray. Dear God, steadfastly, without fail, you care for us in every time and place, through every joy, change, and hardship. Steadfastly, without consideration of class, race, nation, or species, you offer your love to every living creature. Faithful, steadfast God, how can we keep from singing our thanks and praise? Be with us as we go through this coming week, and may we walk in your holy ways. Amen.
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 Thank you.
Be sure to have
Marlene.
your packet
Beautiful.
ready next week.
Thank you, Marlene.
Kim,
What was the
Thank
name
you,
of the
Marlene.
poem again?
it was by John Hall,
Right.
and it's called At Day's End.
Thank you.
Very
Very
good.
Thank you.
Beautiful.